In the last video, we went over kind of the basic layout and design, and I showed you some of the tools. I showed you like what fill and stroke does and what distribute does. Today, I want to look at the tools. So that's everything down this left-hand side here, basically. And we're going to go through each one, kind of show you, well, not each one, some of them we don't use that much, but we'll go down through, show you the important stuff, and just kind of get a good basic understanding of what these things do. We played with this first one right here, which is select and transform. So I've still got my rectangle and my circle. Select and transform. So if I click on the rectangle, when I click it, I can click and hold and move it. But you notice these arrows appear. Well, these are my, let's call them scaling arrows. So if I grab this bottom arrow down here at the bottom and drag, I can make this size different. As we go through Inkscape, Photoshop, whatever tools we're using, there's also going to be a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So right now my right hand, which appears on the wrong side of the screen, is on the mouse, and my left hand is on the keyboard. It's on the left side of the keyboard because we're going to use Shift, and we're going to use Control, and we're going to use Alt, which are all kind of grouped together on the left side of the keyboard. So just be mindful, you're going to have to press buttons with one hand and mouse with the other. So you notice this square right here. If I were to just click this arrow and drag to the right, notice I've actually changed the shape of my rectangle. The rectangle now got wider than it was. I'm going to press Control Z, which is undo. You could also press the little undo thing up here and go back. I could drag it down, and now it's more like a square. So what do I do if I just want this rectangle, but I want that exact shape just to be bigger? Well, that's a modifier, which is pressing the Control button on the keyboard. So I've got Control pressed and held down, and I click and drag from the corner, and it stays the same shape, just different size. Now you can mess this up. Notice I'm dragging down and to the right. If I drag far enough to the right, it's still trying. Nope, it just gave up. Like you see, it did weird there. It was trying, so make sure you drag kind of down and to the right from the corner. Or if it's like if I grab the top corner and I got Control held, I'm dragging up and to the right. If I let go of it, Control at any time, so I'm going to drag my mouse way over here and I let go of Control, and look, it messed the shape up. So make sure that you let go of the mouse before you let go of Control. We can also use Shift as a modifier. So notice, let me grab this one. So if I drag this, I'm dragging from the bottom right corner downwards, but the top left corner isn't moving. If I put this back and I hold Shift and I drag, then it drags from the center. So notice all the corners are moving. So this may be useful. So let's say, cheat a second. Let's say I had this square in here and it was all centered up. Click that one, beauty. All right, it's all centered up. Well, I want to make this square bigger. Well, if I grab here and drag, well, it's no longer centered up. But if I hold Shift and drag, it stays centered and gets bigger. But notice I can still like mess with the shape. I don't want to mess with the shape. So I can actually hold both modifiers. I'm holding Shift and I'm holding Control. And when I do, I drag and it works from the center and it keeps the same shape. It just rescales it. Any object can also be clicked a second time. So I'm going to click off to deselect it. So if I click on it, I get my little scaling arrows. If I click it again, though, the arrows change around the edges. I now have a rotation arrow that lets me spin it, or skew arrows. So if I grab the ones in the middle and not the corners, I can do something like this and skew it. My Control modifier still works here. So if I hold Control and drag, notice that it jumps, boom, 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 in sections. So this means if I want to turn it, 45 degrees, it's 3 clicks. If I want to do it 90 degrees, that's 6 clicks. And it's real easy to rotate it and keep it aligned, I guess we'll call it, as long as I have Control. And then the skew does the same thing. So if I had a bunch of objects and I wanted to skew them all the same amount, I can hold control and notice it goes 1 jump, 2 jump, 3 jump, 4 jump, whatever. But that first jump will always be the same amount, and the second jump will always be the same amount. Shift changes the point of rotation. Notice it rotates from a different place. Shift and control makes the jump from the different. So you can always like combine the two tools. Also notice in the rotation, we've got this little plus arrow, this little plus sign in the middle. When I first click on it, there isn't one. Once rotation comes up, it pops up. This is my point of rotation. So if I move this arrow to the middle over here and grab these move arrows, it's going to rotate around that little plus sign. So wherever that is, that's going to be your point of rotation. All right, that's the move tool. Underneath that, this is the edit path by nodes tool. These are not paths, these are shapes. So I'm going to skip this one for just a second and we're going to come back to it. In fact, I tell you, I'm going to get rid of all of these. So I'm just going to highlight them or draw a box around them, press delete. So this is my rectangle tool. I click and drag and it draws a rectangle. Notice the rounded corners. That is because the last one I drew had rounded corners. There's 2 boxes and a circle. If I grab a box, I can scale. And again, notice it's changing proportions and shape, but if I hold control, I can keep the shape as long as I'm dragging, up in the right direction. If I get off, it tends to jump and do weird things. So you got to kind of drag directly out from the corner. It works the same way with this one. I can click and scale, but this one, this little round circle right here, I can, normally when I draw, it's going to look like that. You can grab that round circle and actually choose how much of the corner is rounded. Notice up here, this rounding number changed. I told you those were the settings for the shape. So when there's no rounding, it's 0. More round, more round, more round, then the numbers get bigger. You can also enter 120. And that way, if you wanted the same amount of rounding on 5 different shapes, you could just type in the number. All right, the ellipse tool, select that. Again, if I draw, it's not a circle. It's this weird whatever. Well, if I hold control and draw from a corner, notice it turns into a circle, and then it keeps my circular shape as long as I don't get too far off. As long as I stay with holding control and then shift draws it from the middle. Get my move tool, move this over here. This is the create stars and polygons. So you get to choose if I want to create a polygon, how many corners does it have? I mean, is it rounded? So not right now, it's not rounded. Look, I can draw a pentagon. It's got a little dot. If I select the dot, I can rotate it and scale it. If I increase the number of corners, it makes a different shape. If I choose to make it a star, then we get kind of a star shape that's off the screen. We'll change color so we can see that. So I've got a star. And again, it's got a little dot right here that I can rotate. And notice the star has a different dot that I can control how much that star dips in. And I can create that shape. It's got 6 corners. Make a 5-pointed star. Drag it in. I can change where that point goes. Make all kinds of neat shapes. And again, you've got settings for that. The 3D box thing draws a 3D box, and it's got settings. I'm kind of glossing over this because, man, I need a bigger screen. I'm kind of glossing over this because it's not something I use very much, but you can see that there, and that's now eating up my screen, so we're going to delete that. In fact, I'm going to delete this. You know what? Get rid of all of it. Just go away. Delete. Spiral. Notice it also, in our settings, it has 3 turns, so I can click and drag out the spiral. I can increase how many turns it has. or I can grab my little node in the middle and unwind it, wind it back. I can also unwind it from the outside. And I can keep going and going and going. Notice there's a divergence setting. So if I increase the divergence, it's closer in the middle and further away. And I can actually, too much. Use the little inner radius thing to kind of control that. Okay. I'm going to delete that as well. Bezier pen. So this is probably going to be an entire video in itself on how to use the Bezier pen. But if I click, and 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 I click, I can draw whatever straight line shape I want to. I go back here and click, and it finishes, and it draws me a little shape. I can give it color, do whatever I want to do with it. But if I get the Bezier tool and I click, and this time when I click, instead of just clicking, I click and hold and drag. Now all of a sudden I can create curves, whatever weird shape I want to. And you can combine these. So I'm going to get rid of that. You can click, click, and then go, you know what, I want this one to be rounded. And then click, 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 and I want that one to be rounded. And click, click, click. So I can combine them. And I actually skipped a tool up here, and that was the edit paths by nodes. This is now a path. So I want to edit paths by nodes. So I'm going to click it, and you notice everywhere there's a corner that I drew a corner, there's these little dots. These are called nodes. Everything is now editable as long as I have my edit paths by node. So I can grab this edge over here and pull it and push it. I can grab any of them and pull them and push them and change the way they go. I can click a node and move the node to somewhere else. And you notice on some of them, these little handles show up. Well, these little handles are when something is curved. So if it's straight, no handles. If it's curved, handles. And these handles actually control the curve amount. So I can bend it and twist it and move all of these all over the place and change how the curve looks and make it bigger and wider. And you can draw all kinds of shapes. This one. And I have whatever that thing is. I can click on it and I now have a blue whatever. Actually, that looks like a mouth, doesn't it? Like with the little dangly uvula thing in the back. I meant to do that. I am a great artist. After that, there's a draw freehand, which lets you just click and draw. So no more lines and curves. It's just drawing. Notice you've got smoothing, and you can do different things. I don't know if you can see the triangle yet. I guess you can't. But there is all kinds of little settings and things you can play with. Here, you can draw. There's a like calligraphy brush, which draws more of a kind of calligraphy-y shape. I don't think that's a word, but go with it. Come here. Delete. That was junk. Delete. This junk. Delete. You have a text tool. Make a text box. Type in. You can change the font size. You can change the font style. You can change the font. You can change spacing and all kinds of stuff in there. You can also, if I click my move tool, I can scale this. I can stretch it. I can hold Control and Shift and do all my modifiers. I can click it twice and get the rotating arrows. I can skew it. Look at that. It's like I'm an artist or something. The gradient tool. I need a shape for this. Well, I guess it would work with text, but it works easier for me to explain with a shape. So I'm going to get rid of this text. Draw a box. All right, I'm going to click on the gradient tool and nothing happens because I don't have a gradient. So I can click and drag, and you notice basically I have it fading from one color to the next. If I select this end, or if I select this end, I can then control those ends separately. So I click this little dot. Right now it's white, so it doesn't look like anything on my background. Let's make it yellow. And you can see a gradient is a fade of color from one to the other. Now, if you remember over here in my fill and stroke, there was actually a gradient panel. So I could have just chosen that and it would have done the same thing. If I choose solid color, it just makes it solid color. If I choose gradient, it fades. And again, I want to change, I want to make that yellow. And you can double click anywhere on the line to add points, or you can click and drag to modify it. So I can click this point right here and drag it over here. I can move it down this way. So I can put it up in this corner, and I click this one and drag it down to this corner. I can click on them and change the colors. I can also double click, and notice it put a little point right there that's now a different point that I can move separately. I can also change the color of that one separately. So I clicked on it, now it's red, and I can kind of adjust. Woo, did not mean to do that. I can kind of adjust where that color lies. So I want more blue, then I'm going to take this red and drag it down here and drag the yellow down there, and we make kind of rainbowy stuff and whatever. All right, that's your gradient tool. Notice when I get rid of the gradient tool, my little gradient selections are gone. So if I want to change this gradient, I either need to come over here to this panel and do it, or I need to pick my gradient tool and voila, gradients. I can edit them. All right, this is mesh tool. We're not going to mess with that. Not right now. This one is the pick colors. So I tell you what, I'm going to make let's make a circle. We'll hold control so I get an actual circle. I'm going to drag that circle out, and if I said, you know what, I want that circle to actually be this yellow down here. As long as this one is selected, I'm going to get my little eyedropper, and I'm going to click this yellow, and now my circle matches. There is a fill bounded areas tool. Any color, so it thinks these are little stripes of color that I select, it's going to paint with whatever color I choose. So I'm going to choose blue, and I click there, and it fills it in with blue. And there's an tweak objects that will need its like own video. Spray paint. Yeah, we don't really use that. There's create diagram connectors. Don't really use that. Zoom, measure. We don't really use that. All right, so there's our tool panel. Now I want to tell you a couple more shortcuts right quick. If I scroll with my mouse wheel, it moves up and down. If I want it to zoom in, I just hold the modifier, the control again. Now when I use my mouse wheel, it zooms in or zooms out. Or you can hit plus and minus on the keyboard. So if I hit plus, it zooms in. If I hit minus, it zooms out. Okay, there's your basic tools for drawing. Good enough. We'll call that good enough for right now.